Everything that I'm about to share with you in this video has, for the last few years, been behind a paywall. This has been viewed on my own website, it's been viewed through Skillshare, and there's been great reviews come back from people really learning a lot and getting the most out of their wide angle lenses. And this is a technique that not that many people know about or share about, but once you learn it, you're going to really love how amazing the results you can create from your wide angle lens are. Now, this was filmed back in 2017, so a few years ago, and just to pre-warn you, the look of me now is very different to back there, and you're going to see a very different version of Ryan as you see me now, but everything is going to be great. This was filmed in Tasmania, beautiful place at Cradle Mountain overlooking Dove Lake. It was a phenomenal day to photograph. We got some really great results. Now, I do mention through some of the video that there's raw files that you can access. I'm not giving those away for free on YouTube. I would recommend that you follow this technique, capture your own images, and then apply the same principles inside of Lightroom and Photoshop when you do the post-production. Now, Lightroom and Photoshop have changed a little bit since then, so don't expect it all to be exactly the same. However, the principles still apply. It's adaptable and changeable as you now get to do it in 2024 and beyond when I'm releasing this video. Now, let's head into the field. This is the first video in the course, and this is about capturing the right images on location before we go into the post-production. I highly recommend that you stick around for the entire length of this video. It is a really good one. You will learn something from this, especially things like luminosity masking, blending, focal length blending. That's obviously the whole idea of this program, and I'm going to give you all of it for free. So I hope you enjoy, and I'll see you at the end of the video. Hi, and welcome to Tasmania. We are here with the camera set up on a tripod right out the front of Cradle Mountain, which you can see just up there. The scene in front of me is absolutely beautiful. We're in golden hour at the moment, standing looking at Dove Lake, and right in front of me is this lovely little plant. It's very interesting. It's got that nice foreground interest, stands out amongst the little grassy ferns that are here in the scene as well. And what we're doing is we're going to be shooting at wide angle. So I'm going to be starting off at 16 millimeters. What to look for in a composition like this is a defined line on the horizon, like we have here with the line of the lake looking at the mountain. If you're looking at a scene with trees moving consistently through the scene, it's going to be a little bit harder to do this type of technique rather than having a defined line on the horizon. Now, with trees, if you are zooming in and they're on the horizon line where you're blending, the scale is going to be out a little bit. If you have a reflection, you'll have to blend in the reflection with the trees. So you have to make sure you capture all these sorts of things in the scene. Now, it is a little bit easier with this one because we do have that defined horizon line, and I will show you what I do when I zoom in, and then we'll go back over to the studio. Now, let's get into taking the shots that we're going to be blending. With the lens set at 16 millimeters now, I'm going to be focusing first on the foreground interest of the plant. So I'll do that, and I've got the composition framed and set up all ready to go. I've just refocused on the plant, and we'll take this shot so that we can get everything right for what we need in the foreground before we move on to doing the background. Now, just a note as well, I am going to be doing two-shot bracketing, so one at a normal exposure and one stop underexposed. Now, the reason I'm doing this is so that I can capture all the highlight details if I need to. So let's take this first shot. Now, with that first shot taken at f13, that gave me a nice depth of field, and I checked to make sure that my foreground interest was nice and sharp, which is great. That's what we want. We need it sharp because that helps to keep the viewer's eye attracted into the image. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to readjust the composition. And what I need to do here is I'm going to go from 16 millimeters and zoom into 35. Now, if I do this just normally, it's going to cut off most of Cradle Mountain, which is not what you want. You actually want to be able to see the mountain. That's the whole purpose of the shot. When I zoomed in again, all the way to 35, I've left a little bit of headroom above the mountain. So this is similar to taking a portrait, but for a mountain in a way. You want to leave a little bit above so that you can capture that nice colourful sky, general sky, whatever it may be. You just want to give it that bit of breathing room so that you've got some room to work with. Now also when we zoom in, this brings in compression. So this is the reason that your camera would make the moon huge if you zoomed into it on a, let's say, an 800mm lens. Now that's a long focal length. It makes the moon look huge in your frame. And it also works its polar opposite when you go to wide angle. That's why in the center of the lens, when you zoom all the way to 16mm on a full frame like this, it pushes the mountain or the midground all the way out as far as it could go. So that's why mountains look really tiny, and that's where this technique comes in. So we'll zoom in all the way to 35mm, but this time I'm going to bring up the composition a little, make sure that it's nice and level, and then I'm going to refocus about halfway through the image. Now the reason I'm doing halfway is because we're going to end up most likely doing a bit of a focus stack, because we want to make sure that the whole image is sharp from front to back. So I've refocused in the middle and I'm going to retake the shot. Now this has blurred out some of the foreground, which is okay because we're going to be blending in that wider foreground that we had before. And finally I'm going to refocus all the way up to the mountain. I'm still doing my 2-shot brackets, so this one image will be made up of 6 different images. I'll capture that image now, and that is looking really good. I'm just going to have a bit of a check, zoom right in and see how sharp it is. It's nice and sharp. We have captured what we wanted to perfectly, and now we'll be able to take it back to the studio and actually put these images together to create the one final image. Hi and welcome back to the studio. We're back here now and I've got Lightroom and Photoshop both open. So we're going to jump inside, make a few small tweaks inside of Lightroom first, get the images looking right how we want them to, and then we're going to take them over into Photoshop and I'll show you how to do this focal blending technique, as well as a little bit of luminosity mask blending and a couple of other tricks, just the way that I finish photos inside of Photoshop, and then we'll save it back into Lightroom, make our final adjustments. So let's jump into it. Alright, so here we have all of our images, and what we're going to do is we're going to take this image, which you saw before, and turn it into this image with all of these types, all of these frames that we've got here. So you can see that there's a big difference between that and that. So that's what we're going to do. Now, when we're out in the field, we took 6 shots here, and then this is obviously the 7th in the gallery. So we're actually not going to use all of these images. We're going to use this one, this one, this one, and this one. So here is our wide angle exposure, this is our middle ground focus, and this is our background focus, and then this is going to be for our sky. So I'm just going to delete some of these out of here. Oh, and quickly also, the images that I'm using here to edit, they are all available to download. Now, I do ask that if you are going to edit this, please, if you do share it, please credit me as the photographer. That would be greatly appreciated, and it also gives credit to the work that has already been done. Secondly, I'm using a Mac here, and the keyboard is obviously different if you're using a PC. So anytime I say Command, it is Control on your computer. Anytime I say Option, that is going to be Alt on your computer. And any other little adjustments I do verbalize them and bring up the keyboard strokes for you so that you can see exactly what I'm doing. Okay, so let's jump into editing these images. This first one is what I'm going to do my base edit on. So I'm going to press the D key and take that over into the Develop module. And now we are inside of the Develop module. I'm just going to press the I key on the keyboard to get rid of the information up there. And here is where we're going to do our base edits. Now normally when I import, a camera calibration preset is applied. I have made these available for you to download as well. And normally it goes straight to camera landscape. I turn this off when I reset it, just so that I could show you this. And if I turn it off and on, you can see how much of a difference that already makes. This brings it to create more of that sort of JPEG image look that you had in the back of your camera, while still keeping it as a raw file. So let's jump into our basic panel here, while keeping it a raw file. So I'm going to go into lens corrections and enable profile corrections and remove chromatic aberration. That is always a good one to do, because if there's any green or purple lines around high areas of contrast, like there would be up here. Now this is soft because we've obviously focused on the foreground, but sometimes you'll see chromatic aberration appearing around there. If I turn that off, you can actually see it up here now, and if I turn it off, you can see that it disappears, which is great. That's what we need it to do. And Lightroom does a pretty good job. So we're going to go up to the basic panel now and start doing the general edits. And what we're looking for here is we're looking for this area. We're not looking at the sky. We don't need the sky to be edited. That's what we've got a single exposure for. So we're just going to be looking at the foreground. Now that brings down the highlights nicely there. I'll bring up the shadows a little, and then I'm going to hold Option, select the whites, and you can see just the line around the top of the mountains. I'm going to make sure there's just a tiny bit there, and that I'm happy with. So we've got a nice pure white point. And then I'll do something similar with the blacks. Down the bottom, you can see just those tiny specks. So I'll bring it up a little bit to about there. So we had it pretty well exposed with the highlights and shadows, as well as the in-camera exposure. And then I'll add some contrast in, and you can see how much that saturates the color. So if you take it all the way, that's definitely way too far. If I bring it back, it looks a little flat, but then bring it up just a tad to about 28. I don't usually go over 50, it's very rare that I do, but this saturates it, brings in that nice natural contrast without losing that realistic feel, which is what we want. We don't want to lose that realistic feel, but we want to give it a surreal realism. Okay, and then an ever so small amount of clarity. This just brings out some of the mid-tone contrast, but too much clarity can really just wipe out an image. It gives it that real grunge look. So I'll just add a very small amount. And I'm starting to get quite happy with how this image is looking. So we'll skip through the tone curve. Don't really need to do any HSL because there's already some nice natural looking colors there with the golden light that we had. And we're going to enhance those a little bit more when we're finishing inside of Photoshop. So I'm going to run straight down here to detail. And of course, our focal point is the plant down here. Now, when you zoom in all the way like this, it does look a little bit soft. But when we bring the sharpness up, you can see that it brings back that detail. Now, I'll bring the sharpness up, but I'm going to take the radius down. So this radius is about the size of the pixels of sharpening, if that makes sense. So the smaller the number, the finer the sharpening detail is, but it gives a more realistic look without fragmenting, which you don't really want. It doesn't look good. And then I'll bring up the detail just a tad to about 35. And then with masking, I'll hold down the Option key and just drag this across until it's selecting around the outlines of the area. So you can see here at masking 70, it's masking around the outside of the mountain, it's masking the plants, but it's not masking the deepest shadows, and it's not masking the water or the sky, which is what we want so that it doesn't create noise or fragmentation. And because we have boosted the shadows, I'm just going to bring up the luminance a small amount. Go back up to detail, and now I'm happy with that. I'm going to leave effects alone, leave the vignette at 0. And if I push the / key, you can see the before and after of what we had. Alright, so with this selected, I'm going to press Command C for copy. Check all, because we want to copy everything. Hit copy. Go across to our next image. So this is the mid-ground sharp image. Press Command V for paste. And that pastes all our exact same settings. And then finally, across to our third image, Command V again, and there it is. So now the mountain is nice and sharp, the midground is nice and sharp in here, and
our foreground is nice and sharp. And that is what we want. Now, I'm going to do one last edit on this bit here. I'm going to go over into the develop module again. This time, I'm going to just go through what we were doing before. So go through the lens corrections, go through the camera calibration, and I want to bring this up, the exposure up just a bit. So I'll bring it up to about there, bring the highlights down, and that looks a bit better than it did. As you go along, you can always hit before and after just to see what work you've done. And now we're only looking to edit the sky. You don't need to worry about this foreground. We've already got the foreground sorted. So I'm going to bring the shadows down, bring the whites up so there's a nice white point in there, and bring the blacks down so there's a black point too. Here, just add a small amount of contrast to saturate those blues while still keeping natural color tone. Before and after, you can see that's just brought up that sky a little bit more, which is what we wanted, but it hasn't overtaken how it will look on the mountain. So here the sky has gone quite dark. That's because I didn't do it as bright in the last edit. But here the sky is still quite bright, but that is just the perfect sky that I want to be able to blend in a portion of. G to go back to grid view. And now I'm just going to select all of my images by holding the command key and just tapping on each one. And I did that so that I didn't highlight this one, whereas you could do shift doing that anyway. I'll right click, edit in, open as layers in Photoshop. Now this is going to bring up this message. This probably won't come up for most of you, but if it does, just hit open anyway. We don't need to use Camera Raw filter. That's what we use Lightroom for. So this is going to open these images inside of Photoshop. I'll just let this do its thing. I'll time lapse through it a little bit and come back once they're all loaded. Alright, now that we are inside of Photoshop, I've got all the layers here, but they're all out of order. So if I select the little eye, they'll go away and they're not in the order that I want them in. So I like to edit in the order that they're going to be in terms of layer. So this is going to be our base layer, drag it down to the bottom, and of course this will be our top layer. 2 and 4, so 2 is our mid-ground exposure because I know that that was taken before the sky shot was taken. Okay, so now that we've got all of our layers in order that we're going to be editing them in, I'm just going to take the eye off so I can see the underlying layers here and here. And I'll just select both of those. So you can either hold Command or Shift, or Control or Shift, and just select both of these. Because we're doing a focus stack on these two, I wanted to do this first. So I'll select both of them, go up to Edit, Auto Align Layers, leave it on Auto. You don't need to worry about vignette removal or geometric distortion. Hit OK. And that is just going to align these two layers so that they are perfectly matched. Now that they are, we can do this focus stack with these two images. So let's go back up to Edit, Auto Blend Layers. I always leave Seamless Tones and Colors ticked, and Stack Images is the option you want. Content Aware Fill, that's just if you've got really misaligned layers, it's got some outside bits, but I usually crop that off anyway, so it will be unticked. And then I'll hit OK. So this is going to blend both of these layers together. And here it has got how the masks look. So white reveals, black conceals. If I zoom in, just hold Command and press the plus key, I can zoom in to about here, so I know that this was out of focus before and this was in focus on our top layer. If I turn it off, you can see that, well, if I turn that one off, sorry, you can see what it's actually blended. This area was sharp when we did the first shot for our focus stack, and then if I turn that, turn that on, you can see how different it looks. Okay, so that's done. With these two layers still Oh, just quickly, I'll also take that back. So press Command 0 and then I just do a Command minus just to zoom out just that little bit. So with these two done and still selected on the layer panel, I'm going to leave them selected and press Command G. This is going to group them into one spot. So if we apply a mask, which we will later on, this will be the one that we apply it to, not the individual layers. And I'll just rename that so that I actually know what we're looking at. So let's just do focus stack background. And I'll just leave that as it is. All right, here is where we start to get into the focal length blend. So if I turn this off and on, you can see how the plant looks and how the mountain looks. I'm going to turn the opacity of this group down first. I'm going to turn it down to about 60%. So we can still see what it actually looks like, and you can start to see some of the underlying layer. Now we're going to go up to the top left here and click on the Move panel. And the Move option will allow us to move the selected layer. And this is where we can adjust. Now what I'm looking for here is to match up these lines, and they do match up pretty well right about here. And sometimes it may take a bit more adjusting than this, but I'll just get this dead right in the way that we want it, and right about there. Now if I turn this up to 100 again, you can see the overlying layer properly, and turn it off and on, and if you're happy with how that is starting to look, which I am in this case, you can apply a mask. Now this mask, we're going to leave this layer selected, come down here to the masking option, I'll hold the Option key and press on that. That creates a black mask. So that's completely masked out what was there. So if I turn it off and on, it doesn't matter. There's nothing revealed. As I said before, black conceals, white reveals. And now we'll go over into the brush tool, just hitting the B key on the keyboard. And to make this brush bigger or smaller quickly on the keyboard, I use the square bracket keys. And it's a very nifty little shortcut. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do a quick brush over. Make sure your foreground color is selected as white, because we want to reveal the top layer. I'll just start painting out some of this top layer here. And that was actually a pretty good quick blend. And you can already see the vision of the image that we're starting to create. So if I turn it off and on again, you can see how it's starting to look. And with the vision of the image that I have, I want these trees on the shore to be that little bit bigger than what they were back here. They look quite small and puny, and it doesn't give the right scale of size. So I'm going to leave that as it is. Now here is where it gets into the little bit of the tricky part, and we want to start masking out some of the bushes to bring in some of the bushes that are a little bit bigger. And we can do this, it is quite simple. On your brush, keep the hardness slightly lower, so let's say around 30%. And then we can just zoom in, and still selected on our mask, just paint in where some of the other bushes were. So you can see where the bushes were there. I'm just going to paint over some of them. Now the good thing with this image is these grasses actually start to look quite like each other, no matter what focal length they're at, which is very, very handy. So I'll just paint in a little bit more in here. And this is where it starts to get tricky, just with sharper images or not. And we'll paint over just a tad more. So you can see it'll start to bring through the sharper versions of the image that we have on the overlay layer. But I don't want to move any of this bush because I know that that is nice and sharp, and potentially just bring in a little bit more of the bush here. I think that's gone a bit too far. I might just remove some of that and just paint over some of there. So that, where that was slightly darker there, that's actually made a shadow on the overlying layer. And these are the types of things you want to watch for. So here I'm going back to white, and just a quick change key for these, a shortcut, is just X. It's very, very simple, and it gets through everything pretty quickly once you get used to doing it. Now here I've gone a little bit over, and that's all right in there. And of course we can change these as we go along. So if I turn this off and on, you'll see how this is actually starting to look quite natural, which is nice. It's what we want. And the light is still coming in from the same direction. There's dark shadows down here. There's shadows in here. The light's hitting the bush, hitting the bushes, and also hitting the sky, which is exactly what we needed. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with how this focal length blend is looking so far. The last thing we need to do is bring in the sky. So the sky frame, we're going to do the same thing as what we did before. Going to select this sky layer, click on the move tool, drop the opacity down to about 60%. We'll just align the mountain. See how it snaps sort of straight into place? Exactly what we want. I'm going to increase the opacity again because I know that that's in place. I'll push the B key just so it goes to the brush so I don't accidentally move it again. But here is where we come into luminosity masking. Up here I've got a little plugin option for Easy Panel. This may come up in a slightly different location for you. The video that comes with this download, it is free, is very good on showing you how to install it. That's actually how I learned to install it. So just click on the plugin option. That is going to bring up these options here. So Easy Panel, Actions by Jimmy McIntyre. He's a very good Photoshop tutorialist, if you want to call him that. But here we're going to leave this darker layer selected so it gives us a nicer blend, and click on Create Luminosity Masks. And this is just going to bring up a whole bunch of marching ants. If you just press Command D, that will deselect them, close that panel off, and create your black mask on this layer. So hold Option, select on that option again, and that will create your black mask. Now we go over here into Channels, and here is where we have all of our luminosity masks. This is really good, this tool. I love it. And now we can go through and select which one looks best. And see how it's gone completely grayscale. It's gone black and white, and you can see this slight graying here, this whiter color up here. It's the same principle as we had before. Black conceals, white reveals. Now, I'm not worried about here because I'm not going to be blending anything in there. I'm going to zoom in, and I'll just go through and find which one works best. Now Brights 3 is pretty good. I'm quite happy with this, but I want to make a few adjustments. So with Brights 3 clicked on, come up here to Image, Adjustments, and Levels. This will bring up a levels adjustment that will just work on this luminosity mask, which is fantastic. It's a great little trick. Now this may seem a little bit confusing, I know. Just keep re-watching the tutorial and following along. I hope that I'm explaining it well enough for you to understand it fully, but this is just the introduction into how to use it. And there's so much more that you can do, but this is a very basic version of it for you. Now let's bring down these whites on the right hand side, and that is going to bring up all of this detail. And then we'll bring up down the mid-tones, and that is going to make the sky pure white. Now if I bring up some of the blacks here, see how it starts to phase out on the edge of the mountain? That is what we want. We don't want any of the mountain to be able to be selected. Now there is a little bit of snow here, and I'm going to have to be careful when I blend this, but I'm happy with how this mask is looking. There's a bit of mid-tone in here, so it's slightly grayer. This is pure white, but I'm happy with this. We won't be blending the full detail of the sky. So I'll hit OK, and then I'll press Command, click on Brights 3. Go back over to Layer, click on the luminosity, on the black layer mask that you've got, and press Command H. That will hide the marching ants. Now they're still there, they will still be there to paint with, but they just hide them so that they don't, look so weird. Now if I press X to select white, you can also click this little arrow key, but I'm painting with white on the black mask. In the top here, I'm going to change the opacity of the brush to 20% or 21. And my hardness is going to get dropped a little bit more to about 15 to 17%. And this is what we want. We want to slowly blend this in rather than do just one big giant blend. So let's just start painting in on the sky. So you can see if I paint down here, it's not going to have any effect at all. But up here, if I keep painting, you may not be able to see much happening at the moment. That's perfectly okay. The whole trick is you don't need to see everything that's happening until turn it off and on. And you can see how that's brought in just that little bit more detail into the sky and the area that we wanted it to come into. So just do this a little bit more, paint over it maybe a couple of times, but you're just doing this until you get it the way that you're wanting it to look. If I turn it off and on, you can see how much of a difference that's really made. Press Command 0 just to go back to full screen. Zoom out just a little bit more. Turn it off and on. You can see it's really brought out those blues. That contrast highlight really worked for us. And that is a quick luminosity mask blend just for a sky, which worked great for tricky things like mountaintops or rocks, whatever it may be. If you've got an uneven horizon, luminosity mask blending will work really, really well. Okay, so if I press Option and just click on the little eye, it will show you before and after of what we started on before we did our first adjustments to this layer. And I'm pretty happy with how this is looking. So let's go into just starting to finish this image off. So with our image looking the way that we want it to, it's time to finish the image. And here is a little bit of the process. Sometimes I do all of these, sometimes I don't, sometimes I do a bit more. Just depends on what the image is. But the first thing I'm going to do is make sure that the luminosity mask is deselected. So I'm going to press Command D to make sure that's deselected, or else when I go to paint in my dodge and burn, which I'll show you how to set up next, it will only do the sky area where it's selected and won't really affect any of this down here. Now I have made this error before and I was wondering why it didn't actually do it for me. So I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned that, because it is a very easy thing to miss, and if you miss it you'll wonder why nothing's happening. So anyway, let's get into this dodge and burn layer. So I'll come down here to the new layer tab and I'll simply select both of these first. I just held the shift key, clicked on the other layer. I'm going to change the blend mode to soft light, and that is how we want it. That takes away that real paintbrush feel to it and sort of gives it that nice soft toning, which is what we want. So I'll rename my layers here, and this is a good little habit to get into. Sometimes I'm not very good at it. Like here, I could have named this sky, I named this focus stack background, I could have named this foreground, but I knew which order they were. This isn't a very complicated blend. So dodge and burn. I'll start on the dodge layer first, and I'm going to press the B key, make sure I'm selected on the brush over here. And now what I'll do is I'll zoom in, just pressing Command plus, and I'll come down to here to start with. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold Option and just simply hover over the plant until I find the right color. Now I'll come up here to the color panel and I'll just increase the brightness a little bit. Decrease my brush size and then take down the opacity. we're going to take this down really nice and low, so probably around 8%. Somewhere that's very low, we can just slowly paint over this to increase the brightness on the bright areas. Now press enter, make sure that's selected. And here I'm going to change the, my hardness is actually pretty low already. I thought it was a bit higher. That's okay, I'm just taking this down to a very low number. You can leave it at 11, I'll just take it down to 10 just to show you where it is. Now here, we're just going to make sure this is selected, and then we'll start painting over the highlighted areas. And you can see how that's already bringing up a little bit more of that color. Do it nice and gently, just so that we get nice even toning throughout the entire image. And we only want to do dodging on the bright areas. That makes sense, because that is what this is all about. Now, because we're using an 8% opacity brush, you just have to keep going over it until you're happy with how the effect looks. And usually I'll like to take it just that little bit further than is actually needed, and then I'll reduce the opacity of the layer so that it's not as prominent. Now, we've only done this plant here and we've only touched it. If I turn that off and on, you can see how much of a difference that's really had on the image already. So I missed a little bit in there, just touch up there. Some of these darker areas I'll just bring up a little bit more, just in here, these sort of mid-tone colors, and I'll go into the shadows when we do the burn layer next. Alright, now we don't really need to keep one single color for this. That's the great thing about dodging and burning in Photoshop. You can do a whole variety of colors on a single layer. Now, we've got all these lovely grasses and the trees and the mountains and the hills and everything. So if I just go and select this wheat color, increase the color a little bit, I'll simply just paint over here. And I'll just keep doing this until I've painted over the highlighted areas or the brighter areas inside of the shot. Now in here you can see that we've got a shadow forming. There was a nice little shadow that formed just under here. So we're going to leave that alone, and we're going to give that a little bit more contrast with this dodge and burn. So I'm just going to keep painting until I'm pretty happy with how the effect looks right about now. So if I turn it off and on, you can see how much brighter but still natural looking these plants now look. As we get further back into the image, just press Command plus, zoom in, and time to change color again. So I'll go with sort of this limey green color, increase the brightness a touch, and then decrease the brush size and just start painting over. Now you can adapt colors just that little bit. You've got that little bit of leeway because it's not a high opacity. You don't have to thoroughly change the color consistently. So as we went darker here, I just changed to a slightly darker color. As you're going along, you can just turn it off and on. You can see what's really happening here, and this is starting to look fantastic. So change color again. Whoops, that was a bit dark. Let's go a slightly brighter color there, increase that, and then paint onto the tops of these bushes along the waterline. Again, we've got that darker tree color. Just select a darker color, increase that a touch, and if you add a little bit more warmth into it as well, that starts to give more of that sunset effect. We were shooting in golden hour anyway, but you just want to enhance it that little bit more. So if I turn it off and on, you can see what we're doing here, and personally I am a fan of how this is starting to come together. The color enhancement is just that perfect amount. Okay, so as we get onto the mountains in the background here, and as I'm moving around as well, I'm just holding the space bar to change it to the hand and dragging around. Hold Option, select my color, sort of choose a light, slightly warm grey, and then we'll just increase that a little bit more. So we'll just keep going along and painting our plants here, change color again, go to a sort of military green, increase the brightness, Now you want to be careful in some of these areas just to try and avoid going into some of the shadows. And we'll just paint along here. You can see there's a nice big shadow here, so I'll avoid painting on that, and then we'll do the burn layer on there shortly. So I'll keep painting, and I'm going through this pretty quickly just for the video to make sure that it doesn't end up being maybe an hour and a half long. Hopefully it won't go that long. And now we get to the mountains. So hold Option again, select the color, increase the brightness of it, and then we'll just start painting this color onto the bright area. And you can see that I'm just going along the edge of where that shadow is, and these shadows in here. So we will do the rock face separately, and I'll just make a bigger brush just so we can speed through this. Increase that, turn it off and on. You can see that's had a very slight color change, and then we might just go over it once more just to enhance it that extra little bit. And here as well, got the snow. We can actually increase the brightness of the snow, which is good. If I just hold Alt, select that, take it all the way up to pure white, and this is really starting to pixel peep on the image, so just ignore how grainy it is, and we'll just paint over the snowy areas. Keep going, and that's looking much better. Turn it off and on. You can see that we've really had a nice effect, increasing that golden hour look. And now onto the rock face. Option, select, increase the color. Might desaturate just a touch by bringing it more to the white, and we'll paint over the rock face. Now here there's more crevices in the rock, so you've got to be a little bit more careful, just dodging and burning through here. And again, I am speeding through this. I am trying to still be quite careful on it, and just making sure we get the right color effect happening. And we'll just do some of these smaller bits all in here. We'll turn this off and on. You can see that that's just brought up the brightness of it a little bit. That's exactly what we wanted. Now because here is the same color tone, we can just translate the color across and keep painting onto these ridge lines. Now with mountains and stuff, this technique works really well. This focal length blending technique works really, really well. But with mountains, you just getting that light and shadow contrast nice can help the image to really pop just that little bit more. So I've changed color, just doing some finer last minute details. I'll do a little bit on here, and I'll increase the brightness, desaturate it just a touch, and paint onto this area here. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with how that looks. Colors looking good. Command 0 to zoom out, and this is just our dodge layer. So you can see how much of an effect we've really had on this image so far. And we haven't even done burn yet, which really draws out that contrast. So we'll go on to burn, and this time we're going to be targeting the dark areas. And we'll just push Option, select the color. Now this is going to be very dark colors. It'll most likely be black in a lot of cases. And we'll just simply start painting into the darker areas. So we'll just keep going, just painting around some of the bushes. I'm not being too particular just in this area, because if I did, it would take forever. And also a lot of these branches are in shadow, so it's okay to make them just that extra bit darker. So if I zoom out a little, turn burn off, you can see what effect we've actually had. Now I've missed a couple of little spots in here. That's all right, I'll just darken them down just that bit more. And the more shadow you have, the more contrast you create. So we'll just paint a bit more into here. You can see where there's light, you just want to leave that just a little bit less than what the rest of the shadow burning is. And here, let's go into here, so we'll make this sort of a dark yellow, lime yellow type color, just so it keeps that nice natural contrast of color as well as light and shadow. Just keep painting into the areas around here. And I'm just going to keep zooming through this, so I probably won't change color as much. If I do, it won't be much of a variation in color. So I will time lapse through just a little bit of this so that you don't have to sit here and watch me painting around a bush. Alright, so now that I've done the majority of the big stuff and I've sort of zoomed through this a little bit, I'll do this area inside the mountain ridgeline. I'll select a color, just bring it down a little bit, maybe make it a little bit more blue. Shadows are very blue, so increase or decrease the brightness, but you can also increase the richness of the blue, so you can keep it sort of a longer straight line, keep it dark, but still keep that little blue tinge to it because it does give it that nice color contrast. I'll paint carefully around the mountain edges just so that we get a nice even color split between there, and I don't paint onto the highlights. It gives a nice natural contrast. I'll do the same thing here, painting darker into this area. And yes, it is still a little bit blue. That is okay. I'm happy with how these results are starting to look. Turn it off and on. Always check your work as you go along. You can see how that was a slightly lighter blue, and as we darken it, it still has that richness of the blue while keeping that contrast and natural shadow. So this is a fantastic trick. It can sometimes take a bit of time depending on what sort of image you're editing. Sometimes it's very quick, sometimes it's a little bit slower, like this process, because we're doing so much intricate detail. Alright, so I think we are good with that. And if I turn it off and on, you can see what burn has done, you can see what dodge has done. And if I select both of these layers, either press Shift or Command, select both of them, press Command G, that will form them into a group, same as what we did with the focus stack, and I'll call this dodge and burn. Now if I turn these off and on, you can see how much contrast they really add into the image, and I'm quite happy with how that is looking. I might decrease the opacity of them just to about 85% or 84%, and that just takes away a little bit of that effect that was slightly overdone. You can still go in and change the opacity of each one individually, but together they're both at 84%. Okay, so I'm happy with how this image looks. There's just a couple of little things that I want to do before we finish. On the keyboard, I'm going to press Command, Option, Shift, E, and that is going to merge all of the layers that we've got here into one layer here. I'm going to call this Sharpen. This is how you get those really nice and crisp, sharp images. So with that layer selected, come up to Filter, Other, High Pass. Now a good ratio for this filter, which brings out the detail in the image, is to keep it between 2 to 4. Usually I'll stick at about 2.5 to 3.2, somewhere in there. I find that's pretty good to me, but if you overdo the effect, so let's just leave it at 3 and hit OK, that will apply the high pass filter. You want to change the blend mode to overlay, and if we zoom in, you can see that that actually looks pretty over sharpened. But if I turn it off and on, it makes the other image look almost soft. So if I decrease the opacity to about 65%, See what that does? That brings the effect a little bit more realism. I'll take it to 60 and I'll leave it there. Now, we don't need to sharpen the sky. We just simply don't. So a very quick way to create a mask that will select out just the sky without going through the whole process again is come down here, select the mask that we did for the sky so that we know that just the sky is selected, hold the Option key and drag that up and drop it onto the sharpen. And now black conceals, white reveals, as I said before. If I press Command I to invert the mask, that will make the base nice and sharp while taking away that sharpening from the sky, which is a handy little trick to know. And you can see here that I've just lost a little bit of detail in this grass. When you're looking at it from here, you don't really notice it because they blend in. When you start to pixel peep, you do notice it just a little bit. Still looks relatively natural with the high ones. You can just see a slight edge forming. Now you'd want to, in primary circumstances, check this before you merge all these layers. But if you do have this sharpen layer, it's very easy to just redo. All you do is just delete this one, go into your mask, and then you paint in or out more elements of what you want to do. Okay, so inside of Photoshop, that image is done. If I press the Alt or hold the Option key and click the little eye, you can see what it was before to what it is now. And it is quite a big difference. I much prefer this shot because it has that grandeur of the mountain while still keeping what looks like a wide angle foreground. Now before we do anything else, we've still got our luminosity masks on the channels option. So if you come back into the Easy Panel plugin, as soon as that comes up, you can click the Delete Luminosity Masks option. And down here, you'll see how big the file size is. So it's currently 1.35 gigabytes, and that's a pretty decent size image. But if I click Delete Luminosity Masks, that'll take just a moment, and you can see it dropped 500 megabytes, or just a little bit more, which is great for saving space, especially if you are doing a significant number of images using luminosity masks, exposure blending, focal length blending, and all the things that you can do inside of Photoshop. Now that that's done, I'll press Command S to save that. It's going to go back across to Lightroom where we'll make our final little adjustments and we can finish off the video. Okay, back inside of Lightroom, here is the image that we've just brought over. If I press D to go into the Develop module, this is where we'll add our last little touches. I'll come straight down here to the Effects panel, and straight away I'm going to add a post-crop vignette. This really helps to draw the viewer's eye in, darkens the corners, and we're on -26, so it's a little bit high. If I turn it off and on, you can see what sort of effect it has. It's darkened that sky a little bit. It's probably a bit too far, so I'll take it back to about -16. Turn it off and on. I'm pretty happy with how that's looking. It's darkened the frames of the image. It's darkened the sky a little bit. It's brought the attention into the main subjects of this shot. With that done, the last thing I'll do is the spot removal tool. You can press Q on the keyboard, press Visualize Spots. I'm just going to increase that amount, and primarily in the skies where you want to focus this attention. Now I'll select that because there was a lens spot there. Zoom out. There's another lens spot just up here. Select that. Get rid of that one. Get rid of this one. Looks like I had a few little spots on the sensor. I think that's another one there. Yes, it is. And once this is clean, the image will be done. So I'm happy with that. Turn Visualize Spots off. Done. Might add, see what it looks like with just a little bit more contrast. That's probably pushing it too much. Maybe to around +6. And I am happy with how that image now looks for the final photograph.
So, how was it? Did you enjoy it? Did you get some great value? I really hope that you did. Now, if you did enjoy it, then make sure you go and click the video up here somewhere, which will be the next one that YouTube recommends for you. I'm posting a huge amount of content on this channel now, so I'm really looking forward to sharing more about the business of creativity and how you can implement that for yourself to step away from the 9 to 5 and into a creative career that you love.